Hey everybody, what's good? How's everything going? Today's video we're gonna be talking about the Juniper JNCDA, which I actually just passed yesterday. But before we hop into that, let me make sure that I got my stream up and running and all that stuff is good. So let me just go check YouTube, which looks solid, and let me go check Periscope real quick. Let's see. How's everybody doing? Let's see. That looks good. Yep, Periscope looks good. Okay. So let's hop into this. Here we go. So, as those of you that have been watching know, I've kind of been going down this pathway of doing all of the Juniper associate level certifications, right? So I did the routing and switching one first, which is called the JNCIA-Junos, and then I did their security one next, and then I think I'm trying to remember when I passed that. I think that was maybe a month or so ago. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Then the next one that I wanted to focus on was their architecture one. So that was a JNCDA. I've done a couple practice test walkthrough videos this past week that folks are using and seeming to find pretty helpful. So then, like with all of the Juniper Genius, or I should say the Juniper Junos Genius website practice test, they have also the voucher test as well. After you pass that, then you get a free exam voucher to go take the test through Pearson VUE, which will save you like $200. So I did that and passed that test to be able to get the free voucher. And then, as I said, yesterday ended up taking the test and passed it. So this video really is going to be giving a little bit of a breakdown about what the test is about, a few tips and tricks based off of my experience with it, and yeah, hopefully we'll point you kind of in the right direction if you're going down that path as far as trying to get the JNCDA. So first things first, if we kind of look at the page here from Juniper as far as what's covered on the exam and stuff like that, it's pretty much the same layout as the other two as far as 65 multiple choice questions, and you have 90 minutes to do it. This being my third Pearson VUE online certification experience, it's pretty straightforward, same as always. You want to show up a little bit early. That way you can make sure that everything is working. I actually ran into some technical difficulties with my webcam, and so showing up a little bit earlier allowed me to work through the problems that I was having with that. So it was a little bit stressful for a few minutes, but overall not too bad. What else with the layout there? Like I said, it's the same 65 questions. This one did not have any CLI commands, just like the SEC test. So it really was all about theory and understanding of the principles that it was covered, unlike the Junos one, which is a lot of commands, for the routing and switching type of stuff. So this exam, I actually feel that the topics that it covered are really, really super beneficial for network engineers or even general IT engineers. Because it covers a whole bunch of different topics that are kind of vendor agnostic. Sure, they sprinkle in a little bit of information on how you would do it in regards to specific Juniper solutions, but a lot of the theory and methodologies that they cover and they want you to understand really are applicable across the board, independent of any type of specific vendor. So out of the 3 exams so far, I actually would recommend this one probably to people the most right off the bat. especially if you weren't necessarily working in an environment that had Juniper equipment. I still think that the other ones are good and you should do them because I think that it's good to vary your skill set from just being completely, Cisco based. But this one for sure, taking all that other stuff into account, just covers a lot of really good architectural and design principles that I hadn't really run into in other junior level network certifications. So I definitely thought that was pretty good. So let's take a little look at the different objectives here for the exam. So really talking about customer network design requirements. That's going to be dealing with like RFPs and doing proposals. So if you aren't necessarily familiar, RFP is a request for proposal. That's something that a organization or company will put out, trying to solicit offers from different companies to come in and build a solution for them, depending upon what their individual requirements are. So I thought that was kind of interesting that they actually focused on that quite a bit, because you don't really see that too much in other IT certifications. So the things that you really want to make sure that you understand when it comes to customer requirements, specifically with like the RFPs, is understanding the executive summary portion of it. What types of information goes into executive summaries when you're providing a proposal back for an RFP, right? So you want your executive summary to hit on your understanding of the business needs of the organization that put out the RFP. You want to make sure that you hit on a high level explanation of your design, some things that kind of back that up. But that's kind of the first big part of that proposal when you're responding to an RFP is something that pretty much everybody is going to read, whether it's at the executive level or the technical level. So you really want to sell your story at that point of why an organization would want to pick your solution. Then your proposal goes into different things like overall design information, and then goes even more deeper dive into technical information. So these are all important things that you want to make sure that you understand. You also want to understand the different types of requirements that an organization would put into an RFP. Those are really key things that they hit on in the studies, and that they will make sure that you are quizzed on in the exam. So if we move down to the next principle, securing the network. So different types of security design principles. I'm going to go through these, and then I'm going to kind of loop back to some of the things that really stuck out to me. It's kind of like some tips, but just so we make sure we cover everything here. Securing the network, so security design principles, how to do things in a way that's going to not open up the architecture to different types of security vulnerabilities. Business continuity, that's really a big one that they hit on a lot. So that's dealing with availability, that's dealing with redundancy, that's dealing with disaster recovery. And there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can go about solutioning that, both from particular Juniper technologies and also from the perspective of just underlying networking principles that you would want to use, as far as having multiple circuits, having multiple data centers, using technologies that allow for load balancing, or like VRRP, which is used to have like a gateway IP address be shared between multiple devices. If you're familiar with Cisco, then you probably know HSRP and GLBP. VRRP is an open standard that any vendor can use, including Cisco. So those are kind of like some technical things that you want to make sure that you understand. Um, the network automation, let's see, network automation and management. So surprisingly, this was a section that I did the worst on. Well, I shouldn't say surprisingly, but I mean, I did really bad on this. I actually got like close to 40% correct. But I don't think there were a lot of questions on it, so I think, maybe if there was like 4 questions or something like that, then maybe I got 2 of them wrong or something like that. But, there's some main points that they hit on um, a lot in the studying for this, and that's pretty much, using Chef for different types of automation, like pushing configs and stuff like that, and then also using JSON for some stuff. Um, you'll see as you go through the studies on that. There's a few things that they actually do hit on, but out of the overall scope of everything that's covered in the material, the automation portion is kind of small. Um, and then the management side of that, they hit up all of their different offerings for Junos Space. So you want to make sure that you understand the network director and log director and the different things that you would use those for. And then even some of their other cloud technologies and SkyATP and things like that. There's a few different things that come in for the management side of stuff there that they cover. So you want to make sure that you fully understand the differences between all of those different tools, and specifically what the benefit of those is if you're implementing it into an environment. And then the last part here, let's see, is network design architecture. So this is kind of taking your 3-layer architecture that you might be familiar with Cisco, your access, distribution, and core layers, kind of putting it in a different type of framework or overlaying it with something else from the Juniper perspective. So they definitely talk a lot about that and how they go about doing that. They really, really love and hit on their virtual chassis configuration, which allows you to take switching devices, multiple physical switching devices, combine them into one virtual chassis. That will allow you to pretty much not need spanning tree, which is a pretty big benefit to that. And implement that, the virtual chassis in your environment. They also go over some other different variations of that you can use. So like on the security side of stuff with the SRXs, you can do firewall clustering. So pretty much understanding what those different technologies are, the benefits that they provide you. Not even how to actually configure them from a CLI perspective, but just understanding why you would want to use those and what benefits they have. So I cover that, hit that quite a bit under the design architecture section. Then you also talk about the difference between concepts you'd use in a data center versus stuff you would use in a campus or a LAN environment, and then stuff you do on the WAN side. So you're gonna definitely you want to be familiar with different types of VPN technologies, both from the perspective of technologies that provide encryption and ones that don't, right? So your IPsec, SSL versus MPLS. They hit up VPLS a little bit. I'm trying to think what else. Kind of different types of topologies you're going to want to be familiar with. So hub and spoke versus site to site versus full mesh. And then also like AD VPN. So if you wanted to have your remote sites be able to communicate with each other without having to go back through the primary site. Those are all things from architecture perspective you want to make sure that you understand. And then of course, since it is Juniper and they're trying to use open source protocols and stuff like that, there is a decent amount of talking about which type of protocols would you want to use or recommend? So in essence, that really comes down to being able to identify stuff that is Cisco, right? So stuff like maybe VTP, Virtual Trunking Protocol, or EIGRP or IGRP, or other things that are kind of CDP, things that are kind of in that vein, versus stuff that is an open standard that anybody can use that will work with multiple vendors. So, like I mentioned, VRRP before, from a routing perspective, BGP and OSPF, things like that. So you definitely want to make sure that you understand and hit on those things as well. I think anything else kind of here on the Juniper page of interest. I mean, they obviously talk about the Junos Genius website, and we looked at that before, right? I mean, so we've gone through this, I think, on both the previous videos. Actually, in all the videos that we've done, I kind of hit on this. But as far as breaking down the different modules and stuff like that, the fact that they have the prep videos, which is nice, and then your practice tests, and then your voucher exam. So all of that, really, really good. Trying to think a few other notes that I want to make sure I hit on to kind of give you some tips to prepare yourself. You want to understand their solution methodology, right? And that's broken down into plan, build, and operate. And there's kind of like different phases within each of those. So understanding the key parts of that methodology is important. You want to understand the different design aspects within the plan phase, right? So that's where you're going to want to go and understand the business drivers for your organization first. You want to understand those first. Then you're going to maybe do some assessment on the environment, understand, what infrastructure is already there, the ports and protocols that you use, stuff like that. It has a few more steps after that, as far as developing a design plan and then actually developing your host names and IP addresses and the protocols and kind of laying out your data flows and stuff like that. So understanding that the plan phase is really, really important. Understanding redundancy and resiliency, we kind of talked about that before. Resiliency being that the way that you architect the environment is that if something bad happens, if something fails somewhere, you have it configured in a way so that there's no or minimal impact to the customer, right? And redundancy is obviously something that's kind of coupled with resiliency, but that's really having multiple devices in place to help aid in that resiliency. We hit on the virtual chassis. We hit on the clustering for the SRXs. We talked about vendor agnostic protocols. Like I said, that's important. You will want to be familiar, if this is the first one that you're taking, you will want to be familiar with the different variations of Juniper devices and what they are specifically used for, right? So if you've already taken the routing and switching, or you've already taken the SEC exam, then you know what EX devices are, what MX devices are, SRXs are. So that should be like second nature to you. But if this is your first time and you haven't taken those other ones and you aren't familiar, then understanding the different types of Juniper devices and the roles that they play in the architecture will be something important that you definitely want to make sure that you understand. Let's see. We talked about the network management tools, so Security Director, Junos Space, Sky ATP, as far as a security service that resides in the cloud, SRXs and virtual SRXs. So you can actually virtualize the SRX, put it into ESX or whatever type of virtual environment you have. There's some things that you might want to do there to protect traffic that's residing just within your virtualized infrastructure, SRX would be the virtual SS. Man, tripping over my words here. The virtual SRX would be the perfect way to do that. So, talked about different types of VPNs, talked about different types of topologies, automation, and we talked a little about security and disaster recovery. So, I think that is about it. That's kind of all of my tips from kind of going through this. Again, I highly recommend the certification. I think it's really, really good. I enjoyed it the most out of all of the certs, although I will say I think I scored the lowest on this one out of all three. So the passing score was a 68, and I think I got a 75, which was kind of wild because I actually felt really, really confident at the end when I hit the submit button. So when I saw it was 75, I was like, whoa, a little taken back by that. But yeah, so that's it. Hope everybody has a great week. Go get at it, keep studying. Hit me up on Twitter. We'll talk soon. All right, take care.